Last spring, it was announced that Marvel laid off a lot of employees at their studios, and this is obviously with the goal of trying to save money for them. But then August came around and we started hearing rumors about the people that they were laying off were actually many of the activists trying to push a social and political agenda with a lot of the stuff they've been putting out, something that we've seen in the last couple of years. This rumor was coming from Chris Gore, and I'm not going to go into all the details on it because, well, I've already made a video talking about this, but just to kind of sum it up, he appeared on a podcast, and this is what he had to say about it. I do know people who work at Marvel. They have cleaned house. They quietly months ago fired all the producers that could be labeled activists. He continued, unlike Lucasfilm is lost. They've lost. They are doubling down on all the nonsense. You will never get anything good out of Lucasfilm and Star Wars. That's it. In contrast, he said Kevin Feige recognizes. Basically, he said, we tried it. It didn't work. He's talking about Phase 4. It didn't work. No Kang, none of these side characters that don't have the legacy of classic characters. He did go on to say it's going to take years before we finally see the results of this decision because it takes years for a lot of these shows to be produced. Some of them were already pretty far along in the pipeline, so we just got them finished out, like Echo or Agatha, for instance. Chris Gore believes that maybe Fantastic Four will be the first thing that we see in this new era of Marvel, or maybe that's already kind of in the process, so it'll be whatever comes afterwards. So who knows, but it will take a couple of years before we finally see if Marvel is actually changing course and how they're presenting their movies, whether they're just trying to shoehorn in political ideology or not. However, that was only one of the issues for them. I mean, I would say that's probably a major issue for them, and it is good that they're trying to fix it if they are indeed trying to fix it. Another issue, though, was just the out of control budgets for all these things, because even if these shows and movies were good, it would have been difficult for them to be profitable for Marvel because of just how much they're spending on them. And that's where we're getting to the subject of today's story, because this one's actually an official announcement by them where they're cutting the budgets on a lot of their programming in order to try to save money. And they're saying this is from Bob Iger's request, which I think this is a smart decision if they are doing this. And there could be some positives and there can also be some negatives. It just really depends on how they choose to go about implementing this sort of thing and what it means for them as a studio if they're going to start reducing the budgets on a lot of their programming. Because if they're just going to keep the exact same stuff, but they understand that the audience just isn't there for it, so they're going to reduce the budget for it, that's obviously not a good thing. But if by reducing the budget, that means it's going to give more creativity to the people actually making it and less studio interference and built by committee, I can see that being a good thing. It really all just depends on what stories they choose to tell with this. And that's kind of the approach that they're leaning to within this article when they made the announcement. Speaking to Variety, Brad Winderbaum, Marvel Studios head of streaming, television, and animation, confirmed that the TV arm of the MCU will be scaling back its budget. This is a result of a mandate from on high, as Disney CEO Bob Iger gave the order to reduce studio spending in 2023. We are looking to make these shows at a reasonable cost. Frankly, it gives us a little bit more freedom creatively when we can bring them in at a reasonable budget. We're starting to see that, or at least allegedly, we're starting to see that with the shows that they've been putting out this year. Like Echo came out in January. That was reported to have cost them $40 million. Agatha All Along is out right now, and they say that that cost less than what Echo was. I don't know if that's necessarily true because we just kind of have their word to go for it. Because when I saw the initial viewership numbers for it, I was saying that it probably wasn't good viewership if they were spending kind of along the lines of what we saw with other Marvel shows like 100, 150, $200 million. If they spent that much on Agatha with the viewership they're getting, it's pretty devastating for them. But I also said if they were spending maybe 20, 30, $40 million on this show, then it's possible that it's successful for them. Maybe not like a huge hit, but a minor success for them if that was the budget. But we just don't know if that's the budget, because one of the things about a lot of their properties that are shot overseas is there's tax filings for those, so we can get an actual accurate figure on what they're spending on it. Not so much for productions domestically. We just kind of have to take their word that they spent less than Echo on it, and I doubt they're ever going to release the numbers on it. So just make with that what you will. As far as Echo, though, only costing them $40 million, I personally have my doubts, and that's not because the show looks like it's significantly more expensive. It very much looks like a $40 million show, but you also have to take into consideration what does it mean to spend so much on a show or a movie, because whenever Disney and Marvel produces these movies and shows, they create a parent company that's responsible for the production of just that property. And it was reported that Kevin Feige saw an initial cut of Echo, didn't like it, so he had them start over. So when they started over, did they also start another production company for that? So the $40 million that they spent on it is just the $40 million from the version that we saw, never mind the cost that they spent on the other version of it. That's possible that that's really what happened. I don't have any records to confirm that one way or the other. This is me just kind of spitballing here, but I do know that they did spend so much on the previous version of Echo, and maybe that's also factored into the total cost that we're getting right now. Like I said, though, I just have my doubts that's actually the case. But either way, if they've learned that they can be a little bit more profitable by spending less on it, then there probably could be good things like what he's saying here, in that it gives the creatives responsible for it more freedom, kind of like something I hinted on a little bit ago, instead of having the studio micromanage it. But I'm not necessarily sure that's the case. And as far as giving them more freedom, he was talking about with CGI and other things like that, saying how Agatha All Along, for instance, they're saving money on it because they're doing things practically. And yes, that's definitely cheaper, but it's not as if CGI is the main culprit for why things are going out of control. Ultimately, why the budgets go out of control is because of lack of planning and poor scripts. Marvel tends to have a habit of just shooting from the hip, or they just gather as much material as possible, try to fix it in the edit. What they can't fix, they go through a bunch of reshoots, and they try to make it seem like, yeah, having months of reshoots, because average movie, it takes like 2 months to shoot. And they're trying to say like, yeah, it's normal to have 2 months worth of reshoots for all the stuff that we're doing right now. It's like, no, that's not normal. That's a result of you not preparing ahead of time what you're going to do. So you have to try to spend more money to fix it later on. And then when the final edit is locked in place, that's when you start spending a ton of money on CGI, and you have to spend a lot more on overtime to try to get it out as quick as possible, because you're not giving your animators enough time to actually do their job. And as a result, they're overworked, underpaid, and the quality is just not there. So having less CGI, maybe that's a cost saving measure, but it's a small one. I think the best thing they should be focusing on is trying to tighten up the scripts and making sure it's already good to go from the get-go. So when you're actually shooting it, you're not wasting money trying to shoot something that you're never going to ultimately use. Before MCU diehards jump to conclusions about Marvel Television's cost cutting, they should probably consider that leaner budgets could very possibly make shows better. It's obvious Marvel is doing this because they have been losing money, so they're not cutting costs because they want to. They're cutting costs because they have no other choice. Now, this could be a good or bad thing, just depending on those rumors in the past of whether they actually got rid of a lot of the activist executives over at Marvel. Because if they did, and they're going to start bringing in people who are fans of the source material, giving them a lower budget and letting them have creative say in what's going on with it, I can see that being a positive. However, if they're still going to bring in a lot of activists, even if they give them a lower budget, they might produce something that is technically profitable for Marvel, but it's not going to be something that general audiences would be keen to. Maybe if instead of doing a $200 million series, you do $10-20 million series, so you have a bunch of stuff out there. Now, obviously, all of it's not going to be made for individual. Like, I might like some of them, not other ones. That's okay. I really don't have a problem with that. Like Agatha All Along, for instance, that if that's a cheap show, fine, they might be successful with it. It's not made for me. It doesn't have to be made for me. If there's other stuff that is made for me, though, that they're putting out there, I'm okay with that. But if they're just going to be bringing in the same type of people making a bunch of shows, it's just catering to a niche demographic, but they're doing it on such a low budget that that's what they're actually being profitable for it. Well, then all that means is Marvel is going to be basically a niche property at this point. So they got something that was basically a multi-billion-dollar franchise that everyone enjoyed and just reduced it down to just catering to a bunch of check boxes. And if that's what Disney wants to do, go ahead. We still got a lot of the old Marvel stuff that we can enjoy, and there's still the comic books out there for people who read those. So you're not going to be missing anything if Disney decides just to do away with this stuff altogether in order to try to pander to whatever demographic they're trying to pander to this week. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think there's pluses or minuses more so than not than to them making this decision out there? Or are you interested in some of the stuff that's coming out, or are you just kind of done with Marvel entirely at this point? Comment below, and if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And if you can, click that like button and share this video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.